President Gertler, Provost Reger, Deans McLean and O'Sullivan, distinguished members of the Platform Party, honored guests, and most importantly, my fellow graduates. Exactly 28 years ago today, I was sitting right there. Dude with the facial hair, same thing as me. That was me. 1986, yeah, think about that. Let me tell you about 1986. It was a big year. Judging by my grad photo, it was a year of big hair. And it was a golden time, if you can imagine this. When someone wanted music, they went to a store called a record store. It was made of bricks or some solid material, and they would buy a shiny disc called a compact disc, or a CD. You probably heard your grandparents talk about it. And then the musician whose music was on that disc got paid a royalty. Very quaint times. Well, a great deal about 1986 is foggy in my mind, but I can tell you one thing with absolute certainty. I never imagined for a moment there'd be an Oscar, a Golden Globe, and an Emmy in my future. Maybe even more significantly, my professors and friends, some of whom I'm delighted to see here today, I can tell you that they definitely never saw any of those things in my future. So how on earth did I get from that seat that guy's sitting in to the red carpet stairs, walking up with a bunch of movie stars into the Dolby Theater? Well, like a good script, that's called a teaser. And I'm not going to answer it until the end of Act 3. So you can feel it here today. The energy in this room is electric. You, your friends, your families who've supported you, you're celebrating your achievement in passing this great milestone today. But it's a time of trepidation, too. For many of you, perhaps all of you, many of you, don't really know where your professional life will go from this point. When I was sitting where you are now, I certainly did not. I had a seemingly useless degree in music composition, and luckily a more useful one, just wait, and a more useful one in education, a field that both my parents spent their professional lives in. Well, let me tell you a bit about my path and some of the things I learned along the way. My earliest memory is sitting in an empty church Saturday mornings, listening to my father sing at rehearsal with the church organist, where this cavernous space was filled with this arresting, magical element, music. It wasn't the singing or performance that interested me, but these mysterious people called composers somehow had this miraculous ability to construct out of time and space this invisible architecture of emotion. And since that moment, I never wanted to do anything else. My first piano teacher reminded me years later at the end of my first lesson, after 30 minutes of not playing a note back in the day, just learning how to hold your hand in a stiff, unnatural way with a dime on the back. Things have changed. He tells me that I asked, when do we learn to compose? Well, I was told to my disappointment that was years away. So I continued on with piano studies and dreamed of being a concert pianist. Fortune, defined as chance, accident, coincidence, destiny. Well, this is when fortune stepped in. Age 14, I went through a glass window, left hand first, cutting 9 tendons and 2 nerves. That was the end of my performance dreams. It seemed like a very, very bad and cruel twist of fate at the time. Out of frustration and response, for the first time, I seriously started writing music. Within a few years, several of my piano pieces were published, appeared here in the syllabus of the Royal Conservatory of Music, Toronto. Later, I came here to study at the Faculty of Music. While I was here, I had no idea exactly how I was going to make a living as a composer. Someone broke to me the bitter news there were no longer court composer appointments. Casting around for a more era-appropriate outlet while I was an undergraduate, I tried all sorts of things, including my first scoring attempt for an educational film company, from which I was fired before I had even finished the first score of the series. But I learned a great deal about my craft here at the faculty, most importantly from that fellow right there. Yeah, you with the gold, yeah, him. The ability to critically analyze my own writing, and I emphasize critical. As it turns out, though, there was no indication of it at the time, but the most important activity for me here was getting involved with making music with various theater groups around campus. And through a stroke of fortune again, it led to my introduction to a fellow named Egoyan, Trinity College grad. who was writing plays and just started work on his first feature film. I completed my Bachelor of Music, working on my Bachelor of Education here, as Adam and I began our first film together, frankly knowing very little about what we were doing, and yet setting the tone for 28 years of the partnership and friendship that we share to this day. I have the University of Toronto to thank for this path-altering life moment, and of course, fortune. So within a couple of years of completing my music degree, the film premiered at the Toronto Film Festival. I got a Canadian Film Academy Award nomination, and suddenly, completely unplanned, mind you, I had a career. A few years after this, I was sailing on Lake Ontario on my sailboat with a big party of people, some of whom I didn't know, and that's what happens when you have a sailboat. A friend of mine was at the helm, and a girl was sitting beside me, and she didn't know me. She didn't know it was my boat. She was telling me with great pride how she was an MBA and how great she was and how great that was and how great she was. Eventually, she asked me what my degree was in, and I said, a Bachelor of Music in Composition. Well, she chortled and said, I bet you use that every day. Well, it gave me a lot of pleasure to say, as a matter of fact, I do use it every day, and it paid for the boat that's keeping your ass out of Lake Ontario. Okay, but before we get too carried away, I actually hadn't paid for that boat. I had won it. I'd won it. The point is, I could have bought it. And maybe that's the most garish example of fortune in my life, winning a sailboat at a boat show. But anyway, that brings me to this. If I remember myself sitting there where you are now, where you all are now, and ask myself what I would want my future self to tell me on this day, it would be these things. Be flexible. Be open and ready for opportunities that arise, and they will arise, although probably not in the way that you imagine them to. Technology, art, the world changes always, so be ready to change yourself. But on the other hand, be true to who you are. Be honest with yourself about who you are, your weaknesses and your strengths. What is the unique thing within you that you have to offer the world? Be honest in the pursuit of what you are passionate about. And trust the unfolding of your destiny. Sometimes the worst twists in life turn out to be the best things. I'll give you one more example. We ended up moving to Los Angeles in 2003 because of a certain disaster that happened, which I can't really talk about because that accountant is still on the run. But when we arrived there, for a full year, I had no work in LA whatsoever. I spent the whole year flying back here to Toronto, and we thought we'd made a terrible mistake. But again, looking back, that move and therefore the reason for it, painful as it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. So be brave. Fortune has a great deal to do with any successful life. And this, of course, is something no one really wants to talk about because it seems like there's nothing you can do about luck. But there is. All of us in this room experience fortune, good and bad, ebbing and flowing, like the tides, if sadly unpredictable. But be sensitive to that ebb and flow of fortune. Listen to and trust your inner voice. Take advantage of those moments which your inner voice alerts you to, which will never, by the way, come again. Others will, but that particular tide has gone. I've had a life with extraordinary good fortune, but I assure you I've had an equal share of bad luck and terrible choices. I turned down, for an example, a little film last year that made over $1 billion, which every single person in this room has seen, and I can't even bring myself to name it. But I could give you lots of other examples, but we'll just stop there because, and this is important, when you make the wrong choice or fortune kicks you in the teeth, do not indulge in regret. Without risk, without mistakes, you will never move forward in life. And if you take the risk that follows your heart, then even failure is not to be regretted. I spent a lot of time working and traveling in other countries, and the more time I spend away, the more time I realize how very Canadian I am and how superior the attitudes and value systems of this great country are. Canadian values and processes are a beacon to the rest of the world. And you and I are fortunate enough to have been steeped in those traditions here at the University of Toronto. So carry that light on and out with you into the world. Do not underestimate the power of your art or your teaching to make this a better world. Hold on to your faith in yourselves, in your art, and follow the path that leads to what you love. You cannot go wrong there, and I wish you the very best of fortune. Thank you.